Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. It's great to see such a great crowd here. I'm Mike Corbett. I'm treasurer of the Noblesville Preservation Alliance, and we sponsor Noblestories. Appreciate everybody coming out on this Sunday afternoon. This is the fourth in our series of Noblestories, and the first that is in this building that is now our home. We've held the other ones here, but we didn't own this building back when we had the other ones here. We bought this building back in October, renamed it Preservation Hall, and our plan is to have these kinds of events and other future events in here, lots of them, cultural, informational, educational events here in Preservation Hall. It's also for rent in case anybody would like to have a party here or a wedding. Just to let you know, it is available for rent. We're hoping that it can actually eventually end up paying for itself. So we appreciate you all coming out. Our plan this year for Noblestories is to have them every other month on the last Sunday of the month. So we've got one now at the end of January. Our next one will be at the end of March. So keep your eyes open for that. We're hoping that we can program them. We don't know what the other programs are going to be just now. We have a committee that actually goes out and recruits speakers like our speaker tonight. And we hope to have 6 of them over the course of this year. We think it's important at the Preservation Alliance that we record our history, pay attention to our history, and capture these stories on camera for posterity. This is being recorded today by our friend Jim Wofford from Hamilton County Television. He's recording it live, and then he will put it on, we'll have it posted on our website, noblesvillepreservation.org, after about 6 o'clock tonight. He's got to run out and get dinner for his wife. But after that, he's going to post it, and we're going to, and we'll have it up so that you can have your friends, if anybody wants to see this and they weren't able to see it live, you'll be able to play it back. So let's get to our program here today. Today's Noblestories is all about life in Noblesville in the 1890s, and our speaker this afternoon is local author and realtor Kurt Meyer. So please join me in welcoming Kurt.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks.
I will just mention that you are welcome to ask questions. If you do, just, and Kurt recognizes you, I've got to come over. In order for your voice to be caught on the video, I've got to hold the mic up next to you. So
right.
When you call on somebody, wait till I get over there.
And I might not see us to shout out if I'm not paying attention to you when you're here, when you have a question. Well, you know, my interest in all this started years ago, over 20 years ago, when I wrote my first book, which was set in the 1890s in Noblesville. And I did that because I was restoring a house that was built in the 1890s, and that sparked that interest. And you start learning about people's lives, and you start learning about the community. And you know, I always thought I hated history as a kid, and I skipped history class in high school a lot. And then I find out that it's like one of those things that I'm most interested in, you know, so, you know, we do learn over time, I guess. I'll point at some things on the screen, and I'll introduce you to my curtain rod. This is what I found that I could point with. I was looking around the house before I left, so we're ready to go there. And recently, well, 8 years ago, 9 years ago, an antique collector let me digitize most of a collection of glass negatives that he had, and I believe they were the possession of a Noblesville photographer from the Victorian era in Noblesville named Harnish, and we'll see Mr. Harnish in these photos a number of times. Do we have relatives of Harnish back here? Very good. So you can tell us more, and you maybe will know more about the photographs than certainly than I know. I just think they're amazing, but we'll see a series of humorous pictures he took of himself in his studio. But that's been a lot of fun, and this first one here of the Tesher family, this is 1159 Connor Street. The house is still there, beautifully restored. Danny and Ginger Imanez live there now, and there's a great story behind this family, a sad story eventually behind this family, and hopefully we'll remember to get to it before the end, but I don't want to start with that. But one of the things I love about this, going through these pictures, I would zoom in on the pictures on my computer, and I would scout all around looking for things to see if I could find interesting detail here or there. And there's great detail here that's a little bit hard to see on the screen. It's easier to see on my computer, but it's right up here in this window. There's an American flag right there and a Cuban flag right here, and that dates the picture exactly. Dave, what year is it?
1898.
That's right, Spanish-American War. The whole country was in a fervor about that, and you could go buy these matching flags to go in the windows of your house to show your support for the war effort. Starting out, I just want to talk a little bit about housing at that time, because I feel like it says a lot about how Americans perceived themselves and what they wanted to be. The generation that was building houses late Victorian era, 1870s, 80s, 90s, they grew up in log cabins, or their parents grew up in log cabins. They didn't want that. They wanted something more permanent. They wanted something that suggested America had arrived. And you start to see a lot of architecture that's based on European architectural styles. So this is actually an early 20th century shot. We know it's after 1903 because you can see the interurban line going down 9th Street. This is 9th and Division. So there is the Masonic Temple. Courthouse would be one of the shadows back here. But here we've got a great example of Gothic Revival architecture taken from English architecture. That house is still there and in beautiful condition. And look at the condition of the brick street there. It looks pretty wonderful. This is Connor Street. We jumped over one. This is where the front porch was in our first picture, and that is Mike and Sandy Stewart's house right next to it, though it looks very different today. It was changed dramatically in the early 20th century. But something else you see here is all the excessive ornamentation. You know, all of this woodwork that's been cut out, all this detail that's been painted in so many different colors, and it really suggests two things. One, this is a country that had hundreds of thousands of acres of woodlands that they could cut and mill into whatever they wanted to mill it into, and hundreds of thousands, even millions of immigrants coming here ready to work for very little money. And suddenly it's affordable to have your house outfitted with all this stuff. But it also, for a young and a little bit immature country, all of that gaudy detail kind of fits with that idea of wanting permanence. This is the Hare family house that sat about where the City Hall expansion area is. So we're kind of across from the Huntington Bank drive-in there off of 10th Street. This was actually moved to South 8th Street when City Hall was built, but it looks almost not recognizable today from where it was moved. And here we get French Second Empire architecture with the sheriff's residence. So another European style sneaking in. And I love this shot just because it's so expressive. If you know Noblesville very well, we're looking at the corner of Hannibal Street, and this is 9th Street going through. This is where the phone company building is, that very ornate house you see there with all that detail. That was the home of Dr. Albert R. Tucker, whose family I fictionalized in my first book. And you can see Brian and Anita Landers's house kind of creeping up there in the background, and their house had been designed by a mail-order architect out of Tennessee named Barber. And he was an architect. You would pick elements out of his design books, tell him what you wanted, send him your site plan. He would send back the design of your house, and he saw very few of the houses that he built actually in completion, though there are thousands of them across the country. And if you know Steve and Shannon Plummer, there is their house back there. We'll get a close-up view of it later. And there it is right there. Perfect. There is an Italianate. So we've seen English style of architecture. We've seen French. We see Italian influences in the architecture. Neat little details I love in these two. Iron straps hammered into the limestone curbs. That's because, you know, a lot of carriage wheels are going to hit that, and they want that to bounce off and not chip away at the stone. And this house looks very much as it did originally. It's been beautifully restored by the plumbers. And here's a very simple little house. This is John Wise's house on the north side, 1200 block of Clinton. That house is still there and looks very much the same as it did then. John was a newspaper man, wrote a lot of poetry that was in the newspapers. He wrote plays that were performed at the Wild Opera House, and I was able to grab his diary and some of his other stuff when this house was sold, only to find out that the day before the family had put his plays that he wrote in the trash, and the trash men had hauled it away. And here's another, you know, big ornamentation on a house, and you know, this is one of those images that, this is actually Wade and Khaki Gerard's house at 12th and Wayne. And it also looks very much the same today as it did then. But the faces, if you think about the picture of the Teschers that we saw first, and these faces now, and how sober they are, and how often the faces are sober. And people ask all the time, how come people didn't smile in photographs? And I think there are a couple of good answers, and if anybody's got another good one, feel free to shout it out. But one is, you know, in the early days of photography, the exposure times took a while, and I think it was thought it's a lot easier to hold still impassively for 30 seconds than it is to go like that. There was also, in the early days of photography, it was expensive, and there was a feeling of reverence about it. In portraits of people before photography, you didn't see them smiling. But I'll just read you something real quick, because it's something to think about as we go through this. And this was written by Mark Twain, and I think it answers the question really well. He's talking about photography. He says, "It transforms into desperados the meekest of men, depicts sinless innocence upon the pictured faces of ruffians, gives the wise man the stupid leer of a fool, and a fool an expression of more than earthly wisdom. If a man tries to look serious when he sits for his picture, the photograph makes him look as solemn as an owl. If he smiles, the photograph smirks repulsively. If he tries to look pleasant, the photograph looks silly. If he makes the fatal mistake of attempting to seem pensive, the camera will surely write him down as an ass. The sun never looks through the photographic instrument that it does not print a lie. The piece of glass it prints on is well named a negative, a contradiction, a misrepresentation, a falsehood. I speak feeling on this matter because by turns the instrument has represented me as a lunatic, a Solomon, a missionary, a burglar, and an abject idiot, and I am neither." So, perfect Twain form there. And even, you know, the ornamentation that we saw in the bigger houses, we even see them in a one-story house. We saw Dr. Tucker's house earlier. This is his son's house, Fred Tucker. When I used to do my before and after photo displays, I would always break people's heart by showing them what this house looks like now. It still stands on South 10th Street, but it's a shadow of its former self. But we put these houses into the streetscape, and this was really a leafy world. I mean, maybe even more so than it is now. And I feel like we're really mindful of it. We have Mary Sue Rowland here, who, when she was mayor, made Noblesville a Tree City, USA, and started a movement to get these trees back into our streetscape again. Thank you, Mary Sue. But we're at 10th and Cherry here. So Cherry is coming across right here. You can see Judge Brown's house. That beautiful, fabulous porch is still there. We come across the street. You can just see the front of the house that's set where Greek's Pizza is now. And that house still exists at the back of the lot. It was lifted up and shoved back. You'll see early 20th century brick underneath an Italianate house. And this Italianate house has its back right up against the alley. Which doesn't make sense either. This one, I believe, I've looked at it at Sanborn Maps, which is where the law firm of, who's it on Seminary Park? Anybody know the lawyer's name? Anyway, there's a law firm there, and Darren Peterson's offices are there. Gordon Byer's offices. Anyway, I believe that was a French Second Empire house, probably a one-story there. And I don't think these streets are dirt. I have been, I mean, I'm sure they're very dirty and have a lot of dirt in them, but I've gone through the city's expenditure records from the 1890s. If the street wasn't brick, it was gravel. And maybe in the outer reaches they were dirt. But I think, as you imagine, if you haven't gravelled the street in a few years, the leaves have decomposed, you have animal manure in it, and so it's a mixture of that and gravel. And then if we pull back towards Connor Street, we're up at 10th and Maple. Maple is coming through right here. Everything you see here has been demolished for the City Hall parking lot, and many of these houses here have been changed. Of course, it's hard for us to even see them behind all the trees. And we just flip ourselves at the same intersection, again, or coming back to Cherry. This is Cherry Street. And again, this house is still there. It's got a salon in the front. The Rushforths live there, and all of this has been demolished for City Hall parking lot. And some of those at the end of the view were demolished for Clancy's long before that. And, you know, another thing that happened in the 1890s with the gas boom hitting Indiana, most of you know that the largest gas field known to exist in the world at that time was right here in central Indiana. Noblesville is a little bit on the western edge of that. and factories came to town. We had a tin works, we had a bucket works, we had a foundry. Lots of different businesses came to town to take advantage of that cheap energy source, and so you get these streets of worker cottages, people who were working in factories and needed somewhere to live. One of the things I've gathered a lot and used in my yard as stepping stones is what they called flagstones back then. They would put these limestone slabs through the street so that you could walk through without getting your feet muddy or dirty from whatever's there in the rain and whatever the horses have left. And when we get into the houses, I think it's another expression of a young country trying to put on airs of importance, because the ornamentation was so extreme. I mean, you look at pattern laid over pattern laid over pattern, and this is inside 1159 Connor. This is the Imanez's house, and we'll see lots of different images of this front parlor and other parts of that house as we go through today. I don't know who these folks are. This room is a little more plain, but look at all the patterning on the carpet, on the ceiling, and a cornice work in the back room, and then we've got a gas light fixture right there that kind of clues us in as what period of time we're in. This is from a Muncie, a series of photographs from Muncie, but again, we got all that exaggerated ornamentation, all of the detail. We have an elderly woman being photographed in her room. And this is one of the things that I love. Whenever I would find pictures from this era inside a house, it seems like those are just harder to come by, to see what people's homes looked like and how they lived behind closed doors. There's another, I mean, they're just so, it's almost exhausting, all of the detail in a room like this. And this one's a little simpler. This is Samuel Tesher, who was there with his family in that very first picture we saw in the front parlor of the Imanez house. And we'll see this room quite a lot. There he is laying napping in a chair. Mr. Tesher had a men's clothing store in one half of what we think of now as the antique mall. Downstairs, Brett Richardson, the owner, is here with us today. I don't know who this is. I have 2 or 3 pictures of this gal and that little statue often beside her, but there she is talking on the phone. We're kind of in the early days of having telephones. If you watch the antique malls, you'll see the little cards every once in a while for sale that will show you the names of people who had telephones. And I've read a couple of histories of that era, just kind of looking at how Midwestern people saw this period of time. And there were a couple things that people would look at you as if you're a little snobby if you had. One of them would be if you had numbers on your house, street numbers, like, what the hell, everybody knows where you live, you know? And if you look at postcards, they would tend to just say a person's name. If you look at old postcards, it usually just says a name and the town. But the other thing would be a telephone. Oh, you're so important, people might need to reach you at a moment's notice, you know, that sort of thing. But it caught on pretty fast. This is another one from the collection of photos from Muncie. And we get into the shopping. You know, this is a pretty well-known photo that's been out there a long time from the Joe Roberts collection. Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we're on Connor Street, and part of this is copper still now, but the front of the building has been changed dramatically. Early 20th century, it was very much simplified. And Craycraft and Osmond would have been one of the big dry goods stores. You could have bought clothing there, you could have bought food there, you could have bought home furnishings. When Emily and Mateo DeRosa bought the building, I went in there with them and, you know, examined the building a couple times. There were still fur lockers in the basement where you could bring your furs to be stored in the summertime to keep them safe from moths. And there's a little broader view of a part of downtown. We recognize some of it. These buildings are still there, and actually this one's just been exposed, and I've got a sale of this building going right now. That says Ledger Block right above it, and I haven't done my research to find was a Noblesville Ledger there during that time. It kind of makes sense. And then these have all been demolished and became the bank building that we know now, and eventually Harrell Hospital would be built back there, and we can see the old Methodist Episcopal Church, which would have been the most significant of the big old churches in town, architecturally speaking, and was demolished, I want to say in the 50s or 60s. Does that sound right, locals?
Yeah, 60s.
Yep. Yeah, it was a pretty beautiful and dramatic, and we actually saw, I showed Fred Tucker's photograph of his house. There was a woman sitting on the front porch, a little girl, and that woman, Katie Durfee, her father built Potter's Bridge and built the sheriff's residence, and she was the first organist in that church when they got Noblesville's first pipe organ. And here's the Grand Hotel. Looks dramatically different than it does today. It's the clock shop. You all recognize Caddy Corner from City Hall. But, you know, just to back up for a minute and give this some context, when you think about the shopping options that we have today, if you lived here or lived within a 5-mile radius of Noblesville, that courthouse square, that's where you shopped. You didn't have a lot of other options. There might have been a little general store here or there, or a neighborhood grocery out in an outlying neighborhood. But for the most part, this was your place. And a Saturday morning, especially a Saturday afternoon, it was, it was a shoulder-to-shoulder kind of shopping district. And lots of horses, a lot of congestion, as you could imagine from that time when you have horse and buggies. This is also from the Joe Roberts collection, and I really love this picture because there's a lot in it if you look closely. Almost from the beginning, Noblesville had an African-American population. And there's an African-American gentleman standing on the far left. We have a low-lying basin. In the original image, you can see water trickling here. I certainly don't think that's for people to bend over and get a drink. I assume it's for horses. You see brooms for sale, and the various baskets and barrels have different food items for sale. Now, that is the alley on the south side of the courthouse square. Noble Maid is in this storefront right next to it. So this is Martha Goshaw's office. And this is one of those, there's kind of an older version of the courthouse square that's maybe Civil War era and right after that. And then there's a gas boom era of the square, which mostly is what we see now. If you look at the stones, they're going to be from the 1880s, 1890s, early 20th century. But this is one of those, I believe, one of the older buildings from that older part of the square. A lot of the older ones got removed and replaced when the gas boom hit. This is from that collection of photographs that I digitized, and I'll show you the storefront I think it's in, because I only know of one building in downtown Noblesville, and if somebody knows another, then correct me. I only know of one where the ceilings are wood paneled rather than tin or plaster, and that is the Kaler building on the south side of Connor, right across from Miller Surveying and Churchill and Antrim. But this is a meat market. You see hams and bacons hanging from a rack on the right, and their canned goods on the left-hand side, and a little butcher's counter in the back. If we go forward, there is the Kaler building as it was back then, and it had 3 bays to it, so I'm assuming one was a meat market and the other sold other kinds of things. But they've obviously just gotten a big delivery of biscuits. I can't read clearly what it says from here, but you can also look on the sidewalk and see, I'm assuming this is autumn. People look like they're dressed a little warmer, and you've got all this produce. It looks like potatoes and apples and things like that that have come from area farms. And it's fun, and the originals of these, I don't know who is up here, but you can see the upstairs signs. Those would have been significant businesses too, lawyers' offices and things like that. Dave, we've got a comment?
This bay was a meat market, as a matter of fact. And
Perfect.
was a photographer.
Very good. I love it. How good is that? Who was the photographer? Do you know?
I have to come up with his name again. But,
Okay.
There was a photography studio out there. I don't know if it was Harnish or not. I think he was over in the Elks Garden.
Very good. So for the recording, I'll tell you again, Dave says that the first bay there was a meat market, and above it was a photographer, interestingly enough. That's wonderful. Here's another really well-known image of the square, but I put it in. This is also from the Joe Roberts collection. But you can see where Mr. Tesher had his clothing store. There's his name, and of course, if he was going to walk home, his house would be down in here. The couple of photos we've seen of that, and there's the old Hare and Sons Buggy Works that became an auto dealership, and there's the storefront we were just looking at, the Kaler building. We look the other way again. This has got to be after 1903 because we have interurban tracks in the street. But the corner drugstore, there was still a corner drugstore when I moved here in the late 80s. We can see the Wild Opera House here in the background, which would figure significantly in the community's entertainment life. And Copperstill is over here right now. You know, talking about the place of horses in this community in that time, it's really just hard to imagine what the town was like then, with the main transportation on the streets being horses, to bicycles to a much lesser extent. But you know, lots of photographs of them. We'll see some interesting ones here, but I wanted to take you through the neighborhoods a little bit. Well, here's another one in the countryside. This is the Tesher family from their collection, out on a ride in the countryside. But just to get a sense of how many people had horses, it's really, I think, less than we think. This is an 1898 Sanborn fire insurance map. You'll notice interesting detail. Cherry Street used to be called Emmis. They had just changed it by the time you get to 1890, perhaps mid-1890s when they changed the street names. Maple.
Downhill into the river. Thank you. All of it was being thrown into the river, and by the 1870s, it was pretty much an open sewer. So that, yeah, that's why they put those livery stables there. Connor Street did not have a bridge, so it was just easy to just sweep it down the hill into the river.
Down to Indianapolis.
Mm-hmm.
Piggybacking on what Dave says, I've mentioned the Tucker family a couple times, who I fictionalized in my first book. Reading the city's old records, I found a reference from the very early 1890s. The Tucker family was living on Division Street, and Dr. Tucker petitioned the city to let him dig a trench from where he was on Division all the way across 10th, across 9th, to the river, so he could have a sewer line for himself, for his house. And I have to presume that what he intended to do, there's a question in the back line.
Nope.
But what I think he intended to do probably was also charge people along the way. You want to connect? Pony up a little money to help pay for this operation, and we'll get you connected to a sewer as well. We got questions in the back.
What was the population at that time?
Good question. Dave, what do you think it was?
I have it written down someplace I couldn't say.
You know, I would have to guess it's 5 to 8. Does that make sense to you? 5 to 8,000 people? Yeah.
Now, you're talking city or Noblesville proper?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
That's probably right. And then you also have to think about the rural people. Again, within a certain radius, this would be where you would come to do all your business. And one thing I love about these pictures when I find them, think of the pictures of men in front of their cars or their motorcycle. This is, you know, this is the 1890s equivalent. Check out my horse. And one of my favorite stories I came across, I was looking for it yesterday in preparation for this, and I couldn't find it, but it was a note from the police Tesher children here. That is Malin, the oldest boy of the family. And also thinking about social life, how people spent their leisure time. Front porch time was a big part of life at that time. This is from a Muncie collection of photographs that I mentioned earlier. You have no television, you have no internet, you have no radio, you have no handheld devices. It's 95 degrees outside and it's 100 inside your house. You are not going to be in your house. You're going to be outside. And you think about what that means in the incidental connections that you make to other people. There are other people, they're trying to be out of their house too, and they're walking up and down the street. There's nothing to watch in the house anyway. I suppose you could read a book if it was cooler. But and a lot of people did that. But front porch life was a big part of life at that time. You'll hear stories of people having sing-alongs, or they'd read poetry to each other. This is some of the Teshers here. That's Mr. Tesher, and there are his three kids, Malin, George, and Edith, and we'll see them over and over again in these pictures. This is a ladies' club photo from the Muncie collection. You know, as I went through the newspapers in Noblesville, writing my first book, I was keeping a track of the number of ladies' clubs there were. It was unbelievable. There was a poetry club, a literature club, a Shakespeare club, a travel club. You name it. There were every kind of knitting, tatting, anything you could imagine. There was a club for where women got together in an afternoon. And again, that's another big social activity for ladies. And my favorite thing about this photo is the woman right in the center. She'd probably turn around somebody, stand up straight, be quiet. Got the back of herself taken. You know, this is, I recognize from the photos I have, this is Mr. Harnish, the photographer's wife right back here. But I love the Christmas image. It's a little bit of a Charlie Brown tree, but still a pretty cool shot. You know, I don't see hardly any photos of people enjoying the river. I read stuff in the newspapers about people ice skating on the river in the wintertime, bonfires burning on the side of the river. But I've got 2 or 3 images of people rowing boats. I assume that's what this is. The Tesher family had friends that lived up near Riverwood, and what we know is Riverwood and Clare now, and there was an iron bridge there. And so I suspect, but I don't really know, that this could be that location. This is the Tesher family up there, and now, you know, Dave Highway and I shared some messages back and forth, I think, on Facebook. We're looking at a picture of Connor Mill that is up in the location of Clare, north of town. And in a really well-known postcard image of Connor Mill, you can see right up against the shoreline of the river a little cutout, which is the waterway for the mill, to turn the mill wheel. And I think that's what we're looking at right here in this picture. It all kind of lines up. This is Mr. Tesher's wife and her sisters climbing over this kind of man-made kind of earthen dam. And there's Mr. Tesher's with his sisters-in-law. And there he is on his front porch. You know, is it Henri de Tocqueville, a French gentleman who came to America in the 1850s, I believe. Somebody correct me if I'm getting this wrong. I believe it was the 1840s or 1850s he came to the United States. He commented a lot about America in his writings, and a lot of Europeans at that time credited him with explaining what Americans are like and what America is like. And one of the things he commented on is no matter where he went, no matter how dusty or dirty the farmhouse or how small the house in a town, there would be stacks of books, stacks of newspapers. There were national magazines at that time. Cosmopolitan was a very popular literary magazine in the 1890s, and people were readers back then. It's one of the ways that you passed your time. And this is the Tesher's front porch where Danny and Ginger Imanez live right now. And you see the brick house next to it. We'll see some other images of it as well. It's that unusual house at the corner of 12th and Connor with the flat roof. There's the Wild Opera House. Again, once that was built, I believe 1895. You know, there was a music hall in town on North 9th Street. I don't really know a lot about that. But as far as public entertainment, this would have been a big focal point at that time. And, you know, music halls were considered a little bit, maybe poor taste is the wrong word, but risque. They imagined ladies dancing and things like why this name Opera House took over. It sounded more lofty and a little classier. And that's an interior shot that I found several years ago, and it looks like perhaps a rehearsal going on for a play inside the Opera House. Circuses would be known to come to town every summer. I would constantly find those in old newspapers and magazines. And again, I'm guessing, I don't know this, but this is in my Noblesville collection of photos, that I'm thinking this was the county fairgrounds, would be up around the area of the hospital, where the hospital is now, because we're not seeing any houses really around in these images, but it looks like they're setting up their tents. You got the roustabouts doing that business. You can see an elephant in the background, and we get one of the elephants up close. So yeah, I believe this is elephants in Noblesville in the 1890s. And you see one of the poles, I assume, for a tent there being set up in the background as well. So the ladies had their ladies groups, and even the men's clubs had women's auxiliaries as well. But one of the more significant men's clubs in town were the Knights of Pythias, and they were upstairs here above where we know Kirk Hardware to be now. And it's really kind of amazing if you think about it. This side of the square is really very much intact. This building got damaged and was cobbled down a bit, but its main facade is still there, and actually one of them is getting its recessed entry restored right now. I don't know if you all noticed that going on downtown. But inside the Knights of Pythias Lodge, it looked like this. It's really the most dramatic tin work I've ever seen. The tin ceiling begins here as a chair rail, and the walls are tin covered, and you have a double cornice, and you have these fixtures in the middle where gaslight fixtures came down, and then there were spots on all four corners for gaslight fixtures. And, I came across lots of newspaper articles about dinners being held here, and when the dinners were held, maybe the wives would come and perform whatever they could perform on musical instruments or sing songs together to entertain the crowd. And so you start to get a sense of all those little ways that people entertain themselves in that era before electronic. This is the Knights of Pythias Lodge above Kirk Hardware, and the basics of this are all still there. It was turned into the Boys and Girls Club, I believe, in the late 1940s.
Is that room partitioned or now?
There is a partition wall, but it's interesting, if you look at the partition wall, they cut all across the top to go around the tin ceiling. It's amazing that they did. Why didn't they just, you assume people would have just ripped out the tin, but they took great care. So I know I sat on the Belfry board in the past decade. I haven't been on the board for a few years, but we did a feasibility study to see, could the Belfry Theater be put in the upstairs of this building? We found that it structurally couldn't handle a theater of that size, but it'd be lovely to see something happen to that space someday. And I don't know that this is the Knights of Pythias. I don't know the uniforms well enough, but here's one of the men's groups. This actually could be the Grand Army of the Republic, which would be the veterans group for Civil War vets. I don't know my history of uniforms well enough to tell you that, but these guys would always be leading parades or involved in the parade to one degree or another. And this is South 9th Street. You can see the old Christian church. All of these buildings are gone. This is the old Presbyterian church that got moved to North 10th and then eventually was demolished. And then this building is still here. It's got a black storefront, and then Copper Still is right next to it. So yeah, we've got the
Richwine apartment buildings
Ridgewine
are there.
apartment buildings. Thank you. Right, they're there now. So parades, lots of, any kind of a reason for a parade, there was one of those. These pictures are really interesting too. I'd love to have somebody who's a really good sports historian to tell me what's going on. To me, it looks like an early version of football, but I realize it could be rugby. You look at the ball that they're using, it's a little more round, but it doesn't really look totally round. Men are playing in street clothes, even people that have a hole in the back of their pants. There's some oddball guy in here that has a headband tied around, and he's all in a white outfit. I see him a few times. You see his legs coming through in two spots right there. There's another one, this guy grimacing in some pain, but it does look kind of like a rugby scrum, doesn't it? And this was the only studio shot in that collection that I found that had somebody in what looks like very early football, garb. And it was in the 1890s that style and this shape of bicycle really took hold in America. You're familiar with kind of the penny farthing bike with a giant front wheel. By the 1890s, that was kind of fading out of popularity because they were so darn dangerous. And they were so dangerous that this style of bicycle was dubbed the safety bike. This is right there at 12th and Connor. And again, zooming in on pictures, you'll see this little child looking out the window there to see what's going on outside. But here she is going down Connor Street on her bike. This is the house that would be in the side yard. The big white Victorian at 12th and Connor that the others used to own. This is the side yard. That house has been demolished. I think that's not bad for a photo of that area to get somebody in motion like that, and it's not completely blurry. And this is from a Muncie collection of photographs. I love this bicycle club. Look at the outfits that people are wearing. You'd wear a hat, ladies in long dresses, pretty impressive stuff. And they've all got all these safety bikes lined up. And that really became a big deal. I know there would be bicycle races here anytime there's any kind of a festival, 4th of July celebration. You'll see that it always included an adult bike race, a kid's bike race. And I found this photograph among the collection, too, of guys running hurdles. And I really see nothing in these photos that takes us back past 1903, 1904 at the latest. So I have no reason to believe this would be any later than that. And this almost looks like they're all peeing, but they're not. I promise you, this is Mr. Tesher and his two sons, and it looks like they just have saplings. They're fishing the saplings at the river. And so children, what was the life like of children in that era? You know, one of those statistics out there, it really frustrates me when you see bad statistics being published online and so forth. But you'll see these cards that say, life in 1900, and here's how much a loaf of bread costs, and here the average life expectancy was 42 years old. And then I'll hear people say, oh, 42 years old was old age in 1900. No, it wasn't. 85 was old age in the 1890s. It's just that the infant mortality rate was so high that it drug that average down. I actually saw a statistic at one point that said if you could reach the age of 17 in 1900, your life expectancy was into the 70s. So if you could get past all of those childhood illnesses, you had a much better chance of living to old age. I've got a couple of these shots. My favorite things about this incredibly cute little kid is mom appears to be watching anxiously from the front door, and then they put the child up on the flower box, and mom is still there. Again, I don't know what house this is or where it is. I think it's interesting that they left the brick plain on the outside, but inside the porch post they painted the brick white. And these are the Tesher boys with another friend, and I don't know what office they're in, but I assume it's somewhere downtown Noblesville. I love the map of Indiana. Gaslight fixture on the wall, and the old stove has been plumbed for a gas line as well. So if gas is going to be so cheap, you might as well use it. Gas then, they couldn't figure out how to meter it effectively early on, so people paid a subscription. So you're paying your flat fee, and that's your fee whether everything is raging and your house is hot or if everything's turned low. My understanding is most people didn't turn any device off. They turned it down to a pilot so they didn't have to relight them, and it was a safety circumstance to some degree, but it could also be dangerous if there was air in the gas lines and it all goes out while you're gone, because there are lots of stories of houses exploding when somebody goes in and lights a match to light the gas lights and they don't realize the house is full of gas. I came across a story that in the ledger, and the sidebar would get filled with whatever the typesetter was, whatever little tidbit of news he had. And I saw one in the middle of winter that said, I sure feel bad for all the people who live out in the farms and don't have the natural gas, because we're in here in our short sleeves sweating, and they're probably out there freezing on the farm shoveling coal into furnaces. Dottie's got a comment back here.
Oh, I knew this old man, George Kelly was his name. Yeah, cool guy. But they lived out on Creek Road and kind of almost in White River Township. And they had gas at their house. They even heated the doghouse with it. So, he felt sorry for the farm people, but...
Here's the Texas front porch again. Edith is there on the far right, girl in the middle, got kids. So kids at play. There's boys of the neighborhood. That's George, Tesher, and Malin, his big brothers on the far left. That's a pretty good one too. Imagine kids that age running the neighborhood. And also, I think it's interesting. It appears that they're tipping a shipping box down the sidewalk. And then look what they're building in the backyard of the brick house of Connor and 12. Like a clubhouse out there kind of playing together. So I kind of put those pictures together. I don't have any reason to believe that one actually led to the other, but it seems logical to me that they're trying to build a clubhouse. Needed some work. When I zoom in, and this is the side yard of the Presbyterian Church. We're on 12th Street looking east. You can see the Faust family's big old barn still there now. But that is a blemish here, but it looks like they have tops. One kid has pulled the top and let it spin in his hand, and the other boys have them down on the sidewalk. Kids playing, the Chesters, that's Edith on the far right, George second from the left. There they are playing in the stream. I'd really love to know what some of these locations were. This is the side backyard of that brick house on the corner. It's on the home tour this past year, 12th and Connor. And it looks like they're sitting on a steam heat system holding tank. I know as I've sold old houses, we'll find these strapped between the joists in a basement or in an attic, and it would be where, hot water would be pressurized and would flow out into the radiators in the house. But I love that image. And they're almost the same game. This is funny too. In that era, these little frilly outfits, little Lord Fauntleroy outfits. So little boys would be wearing all this chiffon and lace. Too many of them were doing it to get beat up for it, I would guess. And this is the oldest picture I have of the two youngest Tesher kids. There's George, much taller than he is in the pictures, and there's Edith. There they are with their grandfather. And I guess I'll allude to what happened to that family. I guess this may be a good place to do it. And I credit Dave Highway with sharing this information with me. The mother of the family started having mental health issues in the early, right after the turn of the century. And she eventually became, I think, uncontrollable. She was very paranoid. She thought people were trying to get in the house and hurt them. She was having other physical ailments to the point she had to be committed to a mental institution in Indianapolis. And it looks as though her husband left the house to his in-laws, this man and his wife, to raise the children. And he went to Indianapolis and was living in a residential hotel not far from the mental institution where his wife had been committed. So as sad a story as it is, it's pretty heroic in that way too. That guy was there trying to make sure his wife was taken care of. And there the kids are with their dad much younger. And there's George laying in bed with a violin. There they are all at a dinner, playing again by the water. Good snowtime pictures, George and Edith. I like that. Over one eye. This is looking down Connor Street from about 12th Street. You're looking back towards the courthouse square, and a lot of the houses that you see back there are gone. They don't even exist anymore, especially these two are gone. And there's Edith. This is an unusual picture. I've got two or three of them. Kids have got like a 2x4 or maybe a 2x2, and they've got a wire strung to it, and the wire is tied around the deer's neck. And all I can imagine the deer is bucking and jumping, and they're doing that to keep it far enough away that it can hurt them. Which, the more you look at it, it's kind of a horrible photograph. And this was, I've gotten to the point where I kind of have a sense of where this, I'm assuming it's a well cover, a pump cover of some sort. I have a number picture of kids sitting and playing on it. These girls are blowing bubbles. And this is somewhere in those backyards between Connor and Maple with 12th Street behind us. So we're looking toward City Hall if we were to go through all these yards where City Hall is now. And here the girls are up a little closer. They've got their little pail of soap water between the trees. newspaper story tells a story of a young man, I believe he was 18 years old. He swallows a bottle of bedbug poison to kill himself. And it takes him a long time to die, many hours, and he spends a lot of time telling people, why he keeps saying, I'm in trouble with somebody in town, and it's just going to be easier if I'm dead. That's his story. Well, I did a presentation about my first book with the Historical Society. Dave brings me a newspaper article from about 9 months earlier, in which Charlie Queer was arrested on the courthouse square dressed as a woman. And apparently it was causing a big fuss, a big ruckus, when people were like, oh my God, that's Charlie Queer dressed as a woman. And the police asked him why had he done this, and he said he was very attracted to another young man in the community, and he wanted to make himself attractive. And I don't find the story comic. I find it very emotional to imagine what it would be like to be LGBT in this era. I know there are people who believe, oh, we got loose about this stuff, and that's when people started thinking about this stuff. No, it always existed. It has always been here. Yep. Hidden. Yep. And there are many stories like that that you would find if you go searching through these newspapers. And there we are back on the. That was a couple we saw together on the hammock. A couple photographs before there on the Texas front porch there on Connor Street. Well, death is another thing that's so different. We are kept from death in our culture now, and it was so much an ever-present part of people's lives in the 1890s. It was very common for people to clean and tend bodies in their own home of their own loved ones. It's pretty hard not to accept what happens when your loved one is there in the living room on a stand dead. This is one that a photo that I have no knowledge of the background of this photo. I found it in the antique mall here in Noblesville. I just found it incredibly beautiful, which I guess explains how creepy I am. But you can zoom in, you see that it says Paula down there. There's a lot of the greenery, and here's rosemary. I googled that. What's the meaning of rosemary? It's remembrance is what rosemary means. I presume it's a German family of a German background. The signs up above to the left of the Jesus image are in German. One of them says, "Don't be afraid. I call you by your name. You are mine." So, especially for a funeral. Yes.
So, were there funeral homes
I
active?
don't know that I'm aware of an actual funeral home in the 1890s in Noblesville, though there were undertakers and embalmers who tended to own furniture stores. So we can sell you a couch, or we can sell you a coffin, and we'll come and embalm at your place if you need.
So for visitation, you would actually go to the home,
It would be in your home.
and the family would dress up.
Lots of times, the women's clubs, we have a question back. Go ahead and pipe in if you want to.
How popular was cremation?
I don't think it was popular at all. He's asking how popular was cremation. I don't think it was popular at all. But I think that, like, if a man was a Civil War vet in the 1890s, the Grand Army of the Republic might get involved and help arrange the funeral. The ladies in the poetry club, or from her church might come and help. She's too emotional, she can't wash the body. We'll do it for her, that sort of thing. So, Dave, do you have another thought you want to add?
Yeah. One of the problems in the 1890s was grave robbery. People stealing the bodies to sell to medical schools down in Indianapolis. So they tended not to be cremated. They were embalmed. It was called injection, and buried that way. So that was kind of a big thing that was going on right at this time period. It actually ended about 1903. So yeah, definitely one piece, that kind of stuff, very, very important there. So.
This is from that collection of Noblesville photographs. But again, I don't know whose funeral this is or where it was held, but I can't imagine that any flower shop that didn't have a flower left. You look at all that's right there, American flags and stars and wagon wheels and a heart. And watch this, you can see through a doorway and you see the bracket of a front porch column. Watch right there. A guy must have stepped into the first attempt. This one's actually from that Muncie collection of photographs. And this is from the Noblesville collection of photographs of different funeral and a different home. All of, everything we've seen, it looks like they've been right inside the home. I do this one just because I think it's interesting. seen this backyard in many of the photographs, and in the photographs, everybody's in some sort of an unusual costume, and this guy seems to be in some sort of a get-up that doesn't seem entirely appropriate for the 1890s. But what's interesting, when you zoom in on this, as I do with those pictures, is what I found. You see it? Right there, hanging from his pocket. That was a really common design motif in that era, and going back in history. Mike Corbett and I were talking about a church that he was aware of that had those designs on the exterior of the church, far ahead of the Iron Derby. West Baden Springs has that image in the ironwork, and the Nazis appropriated it. It has nothing in itself prior to that to do, but of course it's really hard for us to separate the meaning. And one of the last things I wanted to look at, when we talk about people not smiling, I've got a lot of images here of people smiling, and a lot of pictures of people joking around. This is Mr. Harnish. Is it Samuel Harnish?
Or it's O.H. Harnish.
Okay, O.H. Harnish. The gal with him shows up in a lot of pictures. I believe that's his daughter. There he is, a little younger, laying on a rug. And this is, his wife is on the right. No idea. Mike and I were talking earlier. I bought online a CD a few years ago of wax cylinders recordings of off-color body humor from this era, and it's comedians telling dirty jokes. Can I give you one of these? I know it sounds really bad, but I'm really glad that nobody brought any children with them today. I love this. It's so fun. He tried her on the sofa. He tried her on the chair. He tried her on the window seat, but couldn't do it there. He tried her up against the wall and standing on the floor. He tried her sitting on his lap and against the parlor door. He tried her this way and that, and know how it made me laugh. To see the different ways he tried to take her photographs. They tend to be in that vein, and some of it's but again, it's stuff that doesn't surprise you. There he is again with his dog on a faux lane. Now, I think we'll get one more of these, and sadly there's a cat in front of the guy's face, but this guy, young with a full beard, everybody says looks just like Dave Hyder. There he is. Unfortunately, the beard covered up here. And there he is too. What I think is funny too is this is like a paper mache kind of thing put over wood, and you see the edge of this. I see it in all of his photographs as sort of ends sticking out that you would want to have hidden in your image and not shown, because you want it to look like it's stone, but it comes out all the time. You can see another backdrop peeking out there. I'm shooting there on rollers that you just pull down the different scene that you want in the studio.
So is that a Harnish photograph?
Yeah, they're not labeled that way. They're just glass negatives that I got. But the other pictures that I've seen of this guy that are labeled, people said that's Mr. Harnish. And so I assume he's the photographer of all this. It's just hard to know. But there he is again with the little bottle on. And these are some, just to finish up, of people laughing and smiling. They actually did do that. We do find some. There's Edith with her aunt there on Connor Street. And there's ladies, both of them laughing. The one here on the right is trying to cover her face, and that's where we end. Hey, thanks a lot. If anybody have questions, we'll get the microphone to you, and I'll answer them.
Thanks, Kurt. Are there any other questions or comments? I should have known Dottie would like to make a comment.
I don't have a question. I don't have a question, but you said something about an undertaker place. I know that Stanford and Hayes were one of the earliest to have a place, and it was somewhere on Logan Street, not where Coltrane's was, but more downtown, towards downtown. But my aunt and everybody, my grandmother died in 1923, and her they had her funeral at home. But all my aunts would always talk about how Mr. Hayes would say at the funeral home, "Has everybody seen the corpse?" And then they laughed about that, but that was, then they would close up shop and leave.
Thanks. Yeah, David.
I can actually address some of that. There was an undertaker, and I'm not sure if it was the Stanford and Hayes, but it did precede them, and it was on Logan Street. But it's where it's those buildings that they've just uncovered, the Ledger block there. The newspaper was in one part, and I think Rex Stout's dad ran it at one point in time. But also as well, that is where the funeral home was, because people have told me they wonder if there were ghosts there, and I say, oh, there were so many dead people in that building, you wouldn't believe it. So yes, that was. So yeah, so there was definitely. As a matter of fact, speaking of undertakers, one of the ways they dealt with grave robbery was to put explosives in the graves, and Reynolds and Sons, who were one of the undertakers here in the 1880s, actually would give a free explosive away with every burial, and I know where some of them are actually up in Crownland Cemetery there. So.
Anything else?
Yeah. How many of the downtown streets were actually brick? Was it just the central business district I saw, well, of course, Logan and Clinton are 10th to 16th.
Well, that photograph we had of Division and 9th always surprises me that it was that far south of downtown. I know that I've seen it when street work has been done on Connor, clear into the 1300 block, past 13th Street. So certainly the core that it worked its way out.
Well, the asphalt has come up on Mulberry Street several times, and there are bricks under that. So it's that far south for sure. Yeah.
One other question. The Galley Kitchen or Summer Kitchen, could you talk about that? I know that's in a lot of the homes.
Yeah, if you look back, and maybe we can find one here on the Sanborn fire insurance maps. If you look at the Sanborn fire insurance maps, you'll find. Let me go to the older one. From time to time, let's see if we can find one here. Look for a structure in a backyard that looks too big. That's right outside a back door. Here we go. You have the house. Dotted lines mean a porch. So this is open, but this is not open. That's a closed structure. So in my mind, that's a summer kitchen. That's a summer kitchen. So it's going to be hotter than hell in your house in the summertime. You've got this big cast iron stove. You disconnect the stovepipe, and you carry it out to the summer kitchen, and you do your cooking out there to get the heat out of the house. So they're all over the place. There's a great one, Judge John Brown's house at Cherry and 10th has the summer kitchen in the back, and the breezeway has been enclosed now. It's like a little vestibule now. But if you look at it, you can almost see that it sat, 8 feet away from the house in its own little one-story structure.
Great.
Question for David. You mentioned Reynolds. Is that the same? Thanks, Mike. You mentioned Reynolds. Is that the same as the tractor dealership?
No, it's a different family.
Gotcha. Just curious. Thank you.
You're back here. He's talked about 1890s in the picture in this one, but I think I saw a presentation about crime and corruption in Noblesville during this time period. Like we might have had a red light district down on South 8th Street.
That was a little fast there. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Crime and corruption. Yeah. There was a wrong side of the tracks in Hamilton County, and it had to do with the gas boom and with the structures. And I'm sorry, those of you that live in the southwest quadrant, that's where it was, because that was south of the Midland tracks and west of the later nickel plate, something like that. But no, it was right by those tracks. You had Mick Levi, Crazy Mick, who was right there at the intersection. You had Pearl Brandenburg's place down by the river. She had Babe Brown. So, yeah, this is kind of where you had that stuff. That's why the place was nicknamed Johnstown. Have you guys seen that nickname? Do you know about the nickname of Johnstown? Well, the thing is, number one, it was called that because it flooded, of course, every year. Because it was down there on the river there, and it was like the big flood in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. But also, it just became kind of a byword for, just a rough area. There was a meteorite, or actually it was Mars, that could be seen in the sky above there in 1906, and people were talking about, divine intervention and stuff. So you had that. Although I will cut them some slack, because it turns out I've done some more research and found in the 1890s there was also Hell's Half Acre that actually was to the east of the railroad tracks, but still in southern Noblesville there. And that was the one where they had like a ghost war and some stuff like that, and that's too much to go into right now.
Thanks, David. Anything else? Well, thank you, Kurt. It was fascinating. We all enjoyed it. Appreciate you all coming out. One thing that I noticed a lot of on those porch photos were the turned posts on the porches. And I've been thinking a lot about porches because the Preservation Alliance got a loan when we bought this place, and one of the covenants on that loan is we need to fix it up. So over the next couple of years, we'll be taking the vinyl siding off the side, and we hope to be able to put a porch on the front of it. This building did not originally have much of a porch on it, but we think a porch would look pretty good on the outside of this building. So we're thinking about that, and I love those old turn posts. Those things look great. So we thank you all for coming. This event is free. However, we are always open to donations. If you feel so inclined, don't feel obligated, but if you feel so inclined to donate, there's a jar at the back. We appreciate that. We intend to just kind of keep this kind of programming going. So keep your eyes open for future programs. Thank you all for coming, and have a good trip home. Thanks.